Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Oh, great, great. Okay, so hello from Boston and welcome to the Berkeley K-pop Summit. My name is Hae Joo Kim and I'm the assistant chair of the professional music department here at Berkeley College. This multi-day K-pop event is the first of its kind at the college and is a project run by the Berkeley KPI, the K-pop Initiative, a student group with a musical, cultural, and professional interests in the rapidly growing K-pop industry. The Berkeley KPI is led by a group of passionate student leaders who have worked very hard over these past months to make this event come to life. And so I want to take a moment here to recognize this talented group of students for their dedication in realizing this project. And I commend them even more so for doing it in the midst of a still ongoing pandemic. So hats off to them. I want to give them my emoji clap here. The Berkeley K-pop Summit is also made possible through the generous support of the Professional Education Division, the Global Initiatives Office, the Office of Faculty Development, and the Professional Music Department. And so we express our sincere thanks to Dr. Darla Hanley, Dr. Rob Legue, Mr. Jason Camilio, and Mr. Ray Sull. For tonight's opening panel, we are lucky to have with us two very special guests with amazing careers in the K-pop industry. I hand it over now to my co-moderator, Kelly Gravo, who is the Vice President of the Berkeley KPI, to say a few words before introducing the first panelist. Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We are so excited to be celebrating K-pop today. Like Dr. Kim said, this is one of its first at Berkeley, and we're so excited to be hosting this today. I am Kelly Gravo. I am the Vice President of KPI, and I am also a music business management student studying music business management and creative entrepreneurship. So I'm very excited to be talking with two pioneers in this K-pop industry today. I have the honor of introducing Mr. Bernie Cho, who is the president of DFSB Kollective, a Seoul-based artist and label services agency that connects Korean artists and global fans through digital media, marketing, and distribution. Today, DFSB Kollective internationally recognizes Korean music by being a member of Merlin Network, and its artists have been featured at top industry events as South by Southwest and Coachella, as well as profiled in leading international media outlets as BBC, Billboard, and Forbes. They're also an official Korean DSP provider of Apple Music, Spotify, and more. Before founding DFSB Kollective, Mr. Bernie Cho worked for 2 decades in the Korean music TV industry with a notable role as the head of MTV Korea's digital media production. He earned his BA from Dartmouth College, and graduated from the UCLA Anderson School of Management and the Vancouver Film School. Recently, Mr. Cho was featured as a consultant and commentator on the K-pop Evolution YouTube original series and worked with Super M on a current campaign. With that being said, please welcome Mr. Bernie Cho.
Good morning, good afternoon, some places in the world, good evening. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, so that would be Boston. It's evening in Boston. And now it's a pleasure for me to introduce Mr. Eddie Nam. Eddie Nam is an entrepreneur focused in talent management and media. He is the CEO and founder of EN Management, which is home to artists such as Eric Nam, Epic High, and Katie, and includes a roster of Grammy-nominated producers. Through his company, Mr. Nam has provided consulting services for some of the world's leading record labels, such as YG Entertainment, Warner Records, and Team Wang. In 2019, Mr. Nam co-founded Dive Studios, a media company that focuses on making a positive impact on culture and society through audio content. Dive Studios is home to multiple award-winning podcasts and the mental health and wellness audio app called Mindset, which is an ongoing series of stories shared by some of today's most popular artists. Mindset is a platform where artists talk about success, failures, tips, strategies, and lessons learned as they navigate life and career. Eddie Nam is a graduate of Northeastern University, where he was a member of the soccer team. One other thing I'll mention about Eddie Nam, aside from his career as an arts executive, active in his own right, he happens to be the brother of K-pop star Eric Nam, whom he also manages. It's in no small part due to Eddie Nam's very awesome facilitation. I want to give a shout out to Eddie here, that we were able to have Eric Nam come into Berkeley this spring semester to talk to our students. People are still talking about that event, Eddie. It was a really awesome event. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Eddie Nam. You can give him your best internal hello or your clap emoji.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for all those hand claps. I see all of them. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. I went to Northeastern and I was right next door to Berkeley, so excited to get this started.
Right. Okay, so we'll get right into it here. We have a precious about 50 minutes here. I want to start by asking both of you a general question about your personal entry into K-pop. So could you tell us about your own foray into this music genre? I tend not to call K-pop a genre. It's more of like a culture. So tell us about how you first got introduced to K-pop and how you ended up with a career in this industry. Either of you want to go first?
I'm gonna defer to Eddie first because yeah, he's the newlywed.
Okay, you got it. Yeah, so my foray into K-pop. So I actually grew up listening to K-pop for some time, probably up until like 5th or 6th grade. So we used to like rent the VHS tapes and everything and really get into it over family time. And then life happened, middle school happened, high school happened, and I kind of lost touch in it. And then, you know, basically I didn't reconnect with K-pop until my brother, Eric, got into an audition program around 2011. And from there, you know, frankly speaking, my Korean wasn't very good. So I had a lot of my friends and peers at Northeastern kind of give me high level updates week over week. You know, like, hey, your brother, he's in the top 16. Hey, he's in the top 8. He's in, you know, and it was pretty interesting. And I think at that point, I started kind of seeing what K-pop had become. And then I started doing some social media management for him. And then, you know, before you know it, I got my career started in LA. And then now I run 2 companies, just very, very focused on K-pop artists and such. So a lot has changed over time, but I also feel like the entire genre, the whole movement has changed in the last few years. So yeah, I guess I've been surrounded by it my entire life, but now it really is my career. So yeah.
Great, thanks. Bernie?
Yeah, I think in some ways my journey into K-pop and the Korean music industry is somewhat similar to Eddie's in the sense that it was absolutely a complete accident in many ways. You know, it's as weird as it sounds, but I have to really put it in perspective, into context. I entered into, at the time, the Korean music industry in the mid 90s, which is essentially, and it feels in many ways like last century, in the sense that that's how far the Korean music industry evolved over the years. And back then, when I had first come out to Korea, it was right after college. And I had come out to Korea thinking I was going to study to become an academic. And I was partying one night with a friend of mine who had been working on a Korean film. And I met this guy at a party who said he was going to launch a music video channel. And I thought he was full of shit. So we partied all night. He gave me a very nondescript business card with his name and phone number, and that was it. And at the time, I was doing some part-time work for the international record labels here in Korea, teaching these guys English. But it turns out these guys actually all spoke English very well, but they had a very hard time understanding this new music coming out of the US called hip hop. And so I remembered I would have discussions with them where, like, why does Michael Jackson call his album bad? It's really good. Like, how do we market this? You know, so, you know, but for me, it was a great learning experience because, you know, we talked about the Korean music industry. And when I had come out to Korea, the market was about 75% international pop music. And then the remaining 25%, the term, the concept K-pop didn't exist. At the time, it was called Kayo. It was kind of transitioning from the music that you would hear in restaurants or what your parents would listen to or you heard on the taxi. I was very lucky. I arrived in Korea when a very seminal artist had just emerged named Sotaeji, and I had front row seats. I eventually interviewed and got a job at Mnet right out of college, and I was able to really experience the rapid growth of the Korean music industry vis-a-vis as being a music TV producer. And then over the years, I worked at Mnet, worked at MTV for a long time. And I don't know how and why it happened, but I accidentally became a TV show host for some of the shows I was producing. So I was able to go to a lot of overseas award shows and events. And I saw how Korean music was really getting traction in Japan and the rest of Asia. And then lo and behold, fast forward from say, 1993 to 2002, the World Cup happened, and all of a sudden the K-pop exports just started accelerating with artists like BoA breaking big in Japan. And what seemed more and more the exception was starting to become more and more the rule. And that's when I decided to leave the comforts of working at MTV to stake out on my own and set up my own agency. And it's just been a very exhilarating ride to see Korean music and K-pop, become what it is today.
Yeah, definitely. And I will definitely agree on this, the fact that, K-pop in the 90s just feels like a century ago, because it's really morphed and transformed and developed and evolved into something quite different today in 2021, I guess we're in, right? Since my pandemic, but yeah, thank you for that. And so I think Kelly, I think
Yes.
she has the next question.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for both of your input. So my next question is, so some attendees here today may not be really familiar with K-pop. They might see it from a very surface level kind of perspective, but nonetheless, many are here to have a better understanding and an expanded global vision of music. So if you could capture K-pop and the industry in a couple sentences, how would you explain it to them?
Bernie, you got this one. I'll add on.
We're going to have to go paper, scissors, rock next time. So, for me, it's the term itself, K-pop, is a little bit conflicted and maybe borderline confusing, because a lot of people, I think, misinterpret or God forbid, misdefine K-pop as basically shorthand for teen idol dance music. And I have problems with K-pop being assumed to be synonymous with teen idol dance music. I see K-pop as being, pop music from Korea. And, I've seen K-pop evolve sort of in three stages. I would say stage one in the mid 90s to early 2000s, it was made for Korea. In the sense the music was made in Korea, it was made for Koreans, it was only meant for the Korean market. And then in the early 2000s to the early 2010s, it was really made in Korea, where the music was made in Korea, but it was starting to export across Asia and then starting to make waves beyond Asia. And I think right now in the mid 2010s to right now today, we're kind of in phase three, which I would call the made by Korea phase, where you have Korean music either being made obviously by Korean artists or by Korean producers or by Korean music companies. But we're starting to see a lot more globalization or glocalization, in the sense that often Korean music is being produced by people around the world, being choreographed by people around the world, and often being performed and sung by artists who are not only multilingual, but often multicultural and multinational. And, just the most recent IFPI reports had K-pop, Korean pop music, having 6 of the top 20 best-selling albums in the world. And the only other country that had 6 albums in the top 20 was the US. And so right now, when we talk about BTS and when we talk about Blackpink and hopefully more and more artists, they've become mainstream pop music artists, but who also just happen to be from Korea.
Right. Yeah, and just to add on to that, I feel like K-pop, like from the outside looking in, is just super loud choreography, very, very hooky melodies, and then of course like fashion, style, all of the above, and then of course these high budget music videos. But as Bernie said, a lot of it has changed and morphed. It's no longer just this all-encompassing genre. There's K-hip hop, K-R&B, there's the whole indie scene right now. So I mean, it's exciting to see. I mean, if you think about Gangnam Style really putting K-pop on the map to a Western audience, like think about from like 2012 up until 2021 now. I guess it's almost been 10 years, but a lot has changed. You know, it felt like when I saw Big Bang play in LA at the Forum, or was it the Staples Center? It was an arena. It was sold out, and it was in 2014, and it was amazing. You know, you just don't even think this exists, like this niche audience. You're like, oh, it's K-pop, but it's like this niche thing, and nobody really paid attention to it. And then BTS really brought it to a global scale where people couldn't ignore it, right? And so I think year over year, the genre just continues to expand. I'm sure we'll touch on it a little bit more, but as we see with all the major labels and these massive conglomerates teaming up with these other Korean labels, like it's really unclear where K-pop will go, but it's obviously a very, very exciting time.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we do have a question that touches on exactly that. And you know, we're kind of curious where K-pop is going to go next. But just kind of to follow up, you know, what you guys are both saying now. You know, this may not be so straightforward to answer, but what do you think has been a distinguishing factor that sets K-pop apart from its counterparts? So Western pop music, Latin pop music. And I ask, you know, because not everyone in the audience today may be so initiated into K-pop, and so you know they might wonder what is that distinguishing factor, and you can address it musically or culturally or business aspects. Eddie, you want to take that first?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my head when you mention that is the fan culture, I would say, right? Like I just think that like K-pop labels and management groups have just done a very, very good job of cultivating fan communities and letting them really drive this to the forefront, right? Like I remember when big K-pop artists as we knew them in the K-pop world were starting to get on the radars of like Western media. It was like, well, BTS signed with Columbia, but everybody that knew BTS at the time was like, well, they're the hottest act in the world. Like these people, they own Twitter, right? Army runs Twitter, K-pop runs Twitter right now. So it's like these were very obvious things to us, but you know, how did it get there? That's what everybody's trying to look into right now, because as many channels as there are to become an artist, put it out on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple, like you have so many different avenues, TikTok, to really put your music out there. But even from a major label perspective here in the States, it's really hard to cultivate true fans. I'm talking about people that like really will go to multiple shows, streaming music, buy physical albums. Like I think it runs deep, and it's way more multi-layered than just seeing this finished product of just like a bunch of very good looking guys or girls with good choreo and good vocals. It goes a little bit deeper than that. You know, I think there are these little tips and tricks that they're really good at making you feel invested in the artist that you care about. And so, yeah, when I think about that, I can just touch on fan culture, but there's so much more. So Bernie, feel free to add to that.
Yeah, and if I may interject this very quickly, I'm so glad you brought that up, because really it is a culture. And so if you don't know who the Army is, ARMY, this is the name of the fandom for the global pop BTS, and I think they have like they broke the Guinness World Record for being like the most tweeted about or something, and they've been winning the social awards, you know, the Billboard awards for week after week, after month already for several years. So Bernie, yeah, if you had anything to chime in.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of the easiest analogy that I use often to kind of help describe K-pop to the uninitiated is I kind of describe it as sonic bibimbap, in the sense that when you eat bibimbap, you have all these different ingredients and flavors all thrown in a bowl, mixed in, and you recognize all the different ingredients, the different flavors. And I think in this case, the analogy would be those would all be sort of different genres. And there's nothing unique or exclusive about these particular ingredients or flavors, or in this case, genres. But for some odd reason, when it's mixed up and then a special sauce is thrown on top of it, all of a sudden that dish becomes somehow uniquely Korean. And I think in many ways, K-pop is like that, in the sense that when you hear sort of hit K-pop song, you recognize a lot of familiar elements. So whether it's, the rap solo to, a guitar riff to, like just a banging EDM beat. And then obviously the lyrics are going to be in Korean, but you hear, flashes of English here and there, or just, choruses in English and whatnot. And so all of it is recognizable in bits and pieces, but when thrown together, all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, this is K-pop, this is Korean. So I think there's that element of it. And then, one of the other things I try to really harp on people with K-pop is that, if you look at a US pop chart, you will see like a Rihanna or an Eminem or a U2, or a Justin Bieber. And the reality is each of them are coming in from different genres, whether it's R&B, hip hop, rock, electronic music. But by virtue of their sales or their streaming numbers, by default, they become pop artists because they're popular. And I think in Korea, we do see the emergence of more and more diversity in genres, charting and doing well. And, again, I look at the pop chart or the K-pop chart as really being kind of the Champions League of best-selling, most popular songs from different respective genres. And so, and then, the second element about K-pop is, I do agree with Eddie as well, that there's very much a strong fan culture that is really becoming a case study for a lot of academics to international music labels. But I also see that the reason why K-pop, the music industry, has evolved the way it has is because of the business model. The top Korean music companies, and I use that word music company very deliberately because they're really hybrids of a talent agency, artist management, and record label. These large Korean companies, whether it's SM Entertainment, JYP, YG, and big hit now known as Hybe, when you look at their business model, and we can because they're all publicly traded stocks, which that in and of itself is a pretty rare thing in other major markets, we see that their revenue streams are incredibly diverse. And so, and I think this is something that's more interesting for a lot of people when they study K-pop is the business model, because for a lot of these big top companies, recorded music sales is only 25% of their total revenues. Korean music companies are generating 75% vis-a-vis through live concerts or through merchandising and licensing, and then through talent management. And I think this is one of the reasons why Korea was able to not only survive, but really thrive during this COVID situation. And, hence, everyone seems to be talking about like what's going on in Korea. And so, yeah, part of it is the music, but I think a lot of it has to do with the business model as well.
So would you say then, if someone asked you, and this is a question that I get asked a lot, and I've been asked since, the past, decades too, but, what is the K in K-pop? Would you point them to that business model then? Is that like a good way to kind of digest, to understand what that K is? And I guess Bernie, that would be more of like a follow-up.
Okay, yeah, and I was gonna hand that off to Eddie, but yeah,
because musically, right? Because musically, you just told us that it's actually several genres, right? I mean, it's a mix of these essentially Euro-American pop music genres, right? So the question is, why is the K there? And then you're kind of, you mentioned something a little earlier, a few minutes ago, about K-pop is now pop, right? Yeah. So we're kind of in this moment, I feel, where like, okay, so that K is a little bit, it's a little bit tenuous. So if someone said, what is the K? Yeah,
so I think obviously for a lot of people, K-pop, the short, simple answer is if it's a really catchy pop song that happens to be sung in Korean, or I think if Korean artists are singing entirely in English, they get a hall pass, and by virtue of being Korean, that's K-pop. But what we're starting to see is with a lot of the top boy bands, girl bands, hip hop acts and whatnot, or we're starting to see that K-pop acts are actually not really 100% quote unquote purely Korean. They've become Asian pop acts. Now it's the norm to have a Southeast Asian or a member from of Chinese descent, and obviously many Koreans who have lived or studied abroad, all being part of the music making and music performing process. But now, you have more international collaborations with more non-Koreans, and a lot of these hits are often written by non-Koreans. So the K-pop has become a little bit more blurry in terms of, okay, now what does it really stand for? And again, coming full circle, I think in many ways, K-pop has evolved from a genre to more of a culture, in the same way that when we talk about hip hop, we're not just talking about hip hop, just the genre. We talk about hip hop in terms of the fashion. And also in many ways, a lot of really innovative entrepreneurial business models often came from hip hop artists and, the hip hop music scene. And so, I think in many ways, I look to the parallels, the similarities, and in many ways, the influences that K-pop has derived, not only creatively, but more importantly, I think these days commercially.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think K-pop in itself, there's just such like a deeper meaning behind it. I mean, if you look at Epic High, right? Like they are not, by description or even visually, you wouldn't think they are a K-pop group, right? But they are highly regarded as K-pop legends. They've really kind of pioneered in a lot of different ways in the hip hop space. Yes, they have Korean ballads and very K-poppy like songs, but they've definitely morphed and transformed with that title over the years. I do want to raise a point that like K-pop, especially now, I feel like people are more like they're more willing to accept it for what it is. But from like a singer-songwriter perspective, right? It could be very frustrating to feel boxed in and categorized as K-pop just because you're Korean, right? I'm sure the indie folks in Korea, or like Hyogo, for example, like do they identify as K-pop? I'm not sure. I mean, they're just like an incredibly talented indie rock band. But when they're playing major festivals like Coachella in the States, like do they want to be called a K-pop band? I'm not sure, because that by definition, it just immediately people think of, oh, it's K-pop, but these guys don't look like BTS or NCT. And so I think it's a good entry point to get people excited about Asian artists and K-pop artists, but it really is a blurred definition now, like Bernie said.
Thank you. Yeah.
So yeah, I have a follow-up question with kind of the points that you both were making about how the identity of K-pop it's not just started, but it has changed and it is changing. So with like talking about K-pop and its popularity with, I would say like a main competitor, which is the United States and the Western market, do you think that this popularity in the West will change aspects of the idol system, of the trainee system, the ways that K-pop is built? Do you both have any inputs on that?
For full disclosure, I think, both Eddie and I, we've really had the honor, the pleasure to work with Epic High in different capacities over the years. One thing I want to just put out there, because I think it's important to note, is as much as we talk about Blackpink and BTS and other K-pop acts, the first Korean music act ever to hit #1 on a US music chart was actually Epic High. They debuted #1 on the Apple iTunes Music hip hop chart in the US sometime, I think, around 2010. And so, and in hindsight, it wasn't just the first Korean music act. They were the first music act from Asia ever to hit #1 in the US. And so, when I see all this media hype about, who's hitting #1 and who we're doing firsts, there are a lot of fans who want to give credit to the BTSs or the 88 Risings, but the reality was Epic High was the first to do it. And the thing is, yes, they're an amazing hip hop act, but the reality is they're K-pop by default, not by choice. They're by K-pop by default because they happen to be popular and they also happen to be Korean. And I think one of my biggest challenges / opportunities is breaking and, more importantly, shattering this stereotype that K-pop is teen idol dance music, because that is shorthand for a lot of Western music critics to say it's shitty, disposable music. And that's something that I hope more and more Korean music acts can sort of show their different styles and different genres, so that K-pop is known as not just teen idol dance music. We have to move away from that stereotype. And I think that, Eddie named a lot of great artists like Hae Joo. Yeah, they are a alternative rock band from Korea, but also because they do well on the charts and through streaming and through, festival appearances, I think in many ways, just again, by default, they're a K-pop act by virtue of just being popular and being from Korea. And so in many ways, I would love to see K-pop be sort of looked at and treated like, say, Latin music. When you hear a Spanish song, hip hop song or rock song, reggaeton, ballad, it's all considered Latin music, but it's also recognized one level deeper for being an electronic or a hip hop or a rock track as well. So for me, I hope that K-pop starts being recognized for that diversity. But at the same time, a lot of this boy band, girl band dance music, it's great pop music. So, I can't hate on it and diss on it as well.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully said. I think right now it's like we're better in numbers at the moment, right? It's like you look at Spotify, there's like a whole K-pop genre right now. And of course it's nice to be on there and to see millions of people on those playlists, but how do you differentiate from the pack? I mean, this is a much longer-winded question and answer, but it's like
that's 3 bottles of soju Eddie lined up.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll touch on it later, but I think you hit it right on the head. It's like everybody, you need to be a part of it so you're categorized and you're in the conversation, but everybody wants to have that individualistic, that sauce that makes them different. But right now, I think in Western media, it's just easier to lump everybody in K-pop. People don't really want to think beyond that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that input and, the interplay with like identity and trying to understand, a bigger, like a social and like political like aspect to it. So it's a great reminder that, it's about the artistry and not necessarily about lumping it into so-called like a Korean identity, but it's beyond that. So thank you so much. Yeah. Dr. Kim?
So yeah. So I will ask this next question. And it's kind of has to do with the COVID culture, but with the amount of money being made, excuse me, with virtual concerts, do you think that the K-pop industry will return to the same grind after COVID? So I'm thinking here about Bang Bang Con, BTS's Bang Bang Con, about BTS's Map of the Soul 7. I'm thinking about the SM Entertainment's Beyond Live concert series. As I recall, BTS's Bang Bang Con back in June made something in the area of $20 million. I mean, it was just stunning. So, I think everyone, whatever field you're in, we're wondering as the world opens up, are we going to go back to the pre-COVID life, or how much are we going to take from the things that we've established in COVID? So so what do you have any thoughts on that?
Eddie, I'm going to spin the bottle. You go first.
Okay. Yeah, you got it.
So what both of these gentlemen are doing is they just both really want the mic, but they're just being polite to each other.
Yeah, we're being very Korean right now. I'm like, oh, please, sir, like, please speak. No, I'm happy to take this one. This is really interesting because obviously from my artists and all of my peers, when live touring went out the window, it was a big, what the F moment, and it was a real scare. With that said, I think every iteration of a live streaming platform had appeared before our eyes within weeks. Everybody wanted to do something similar to what BTS did. Now, with that said, I think that while live streaming is great, and I'm sure the experience was awesome, I saw it. I mean, it was as high production as it could become. I still think there's nothing like the real thing, the real moment of just like getting chills, being around your peers, being in a stadium with 80,000 people or even 500 people kind of singing along and being shoulder to shoulder, right? I don't think anybody on this call would really argue that. But I do think that from the business part of me says, that live stream that BTS did and these other idol groups have done, the margins are great. Let's just put it that way. Margins are fantastic. There are no flights, there are no hotels, There's no transportation, security, all of that, and it's just been like this simple transaction to reach millions of people. But I think they're going to hit the road. I think they have a lot of stadiums to hit. I think the rest of the world, we're excited. We're going to see a roaring 20s come before us very quickly. I saw like Live Nation reported that 2022 was going to be the biggest touring year ever in the history of touring. I'm already like seeing it. Like we've been holding venues since like 6 to 8 months ago when we were like looking at 2022, and so it's just very crowded. Everybody wants to get back on the road, and I think the future of live streaming, because you can reach so many continents at once, maybe it's going to be for like a special holiday Christmas concert or something, but I just don't think it's going to replace the real thing. That's my take. Please feel free to add on to that, Bernie.
Yeah, so I'll sort of maybe throw on a little bit of fat to that skeleton that you put out there. I completely agree with Eddie in his assessment. When we talk about how COVID impacted the Korean music industry, again, circling back to the IFPI report, Korea was the fastest growing music market in the world last year. They did 44% year-on-year growth. And a lot of that was fueled by not just, digital music streaming, but video streaming and concert revenues. And one of the interesting things is that, with a lot of these, we saw Korea move away from, the streaming music platforms, be it audio streaming and video streaming, into a whole new category, a whole new sector, a whole new business, which is fandoms, fan-centric community platforms. And pre-COVID, the K-pop music industry was experimenting and expanding with platforms such as V Live, which was a fan to artist interaction platform. And then also a lot of these live streaming technologies were actually developed not for replacing world tours, but to have bigger and better fan meetings. But then when COVID hit, a lot of these top Korean music companies, and more importantly, technology companies, quickly accelerated these particular fan-driven, fan-centric platforms into becoming live music solutions. And I think that it's these live streaming solutions that will stay in the industry. But again, I agree with Eddie that a lot of acts just want to go back on the road because that experience is something that can't be replicated just looking at a screen. But when we look at these live streams, what made the K-pop live streams not just more enjoyable, but more commercially successful was the things that were bundled and packaged with those live streams. Often a lot of K-pop fans around the world bought merch when they bought tickets to watch these concerts. And last year, Korea's physical music market surged so much that Korea last year became the second largest market in the world for CDs. Japan is number one. The US used to be number two. Korea surpassed the US in terms of CDs sales. And the reason being, again, fan culture. Fans knew their favorite artists wouldn't be able to go on the road. And so basically, they bought CDs as a form of a tip jar, but it was a 2-for-1 deal. Not only were they supporting their favorite artists by buying CDs, which have beautiful, huge, juicy, margins, but more importantly, that's what fueled their chart success, not only in Korea, but particularly in the US. Last year, BTS had not one, not two, not three. They had 4 albums in the global top 20 sales, and it was mostly driven by physical CD sales. BTS basically outsold the second most popular artist in the world, Taylor Swift, by 400% margin. That's going to stay.
Incredible.
Yeah, and I think live streaming as a very advanced fan solution will stay. And I think, as much as people talk about Hybe, Big Hit Entertainment, acquiring Ithaca Holdings and Scooter Brown and having Ariana Grande, J Balvin, and Justin Bieber now in the same portfolio as BTS and whatnot, again, I'm more curious to see sort of, the Western artists adopting and adapting to tools, techniques, and technologies developed by Korean music companies to take their global fan base to a whole nother level.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. I think Kelly actually is going to give you the next question, which has to do with exactly what you're talking about, all the mergers that are going on. But just to chime in very quickly, so K-pop was actually kind of very well positioned. They were ready during COVID because of the fan culture, right? So the tech was ready to go. So that's just really an interesting kind of coincidence and just kind of a development that just yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating how they just were able to accelerate that and then not take too much of a hit last year. But Kelly, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so stepping away from the live streaming model, I wanted to ask. So there have been recently some high-profile partnerships with executives and labels involving K-pop. So there's the SM and Capitol Music, there's Big Hit and Universal, Hybe and Ithaca Holdings, and SM and MGM Studios. So could you both comment on these? What do you think about those? Do you think this is a new trend? What is this saying about the industry right now?
And what will it bring?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one first. I think over the past few years, we've definitely seen these partnerships kind of in the background, right? You've seen Blackpink aligning with Interscope. You saw NCT and Super M also with Capital, RCA with like ATEEZ and so forth. And you saw these alliances being made, right? But I think from like a K-pop perspective, like the fans are smart. They're just like, well, of course, like these K-pop bands, they've already earned their stripes. They already have tens of millions of followers. Like there's no real development going in. Yeah, you might get them like you might get the late night show, you might get some good press, and you might do the rinse and repeat job that everyone has done after BTS in a lot of different ways. But this is particularly exciting for me, these high profile partnerships where these giant conglomerates are actually coming together shoulder to shoulder, because I think this is going to be an exciting time to see the next generation of artists, right? Because originally it's all been coming out of Korea. But now with that infrastructure and that alliance being made, I think people are drawing the lines and they're saying like, we are going to develop our in-house K-pop bands, or K-pop groups, as you will, making this even more international and maybe not being just a K-pop thing. So will it work? I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I would agree with Eddie and sort of add on that the cold, harsh reality is the major US labels, Sony, Universal, and Warner, did not see this K-pop boom happen. They completely missed it. And what happened is that while they were so focused on trying to import Western music and Western artists into Asia, their A&R discovery and development budgets, and not just financial resources, but human resources, were woefully low. I would actually just go so far to say pathetic. And what ended up happening is a lot of these Korean music companies just couldn't wait to be picked up and signed by a big Western label to take them across Asia and beyond Asia. They improvised, they innovated, and they basically took on a lot of the roles of a talent agency and a record label, and basically through a lot of trial and error and a lot of probably more misses, and then they figured out how to make hits. They found success regionally and globally. And so what ended up happening is I think a lot of these international music labels, yeah, some of it might feel like, they're jumping at the bandwagon at the last minute. Like they're that, person in a marathon, providing bottled water to the, the runner who's about to cross the finish line. And then, they're running alongside the fucking runner, go across the finish line and act as if they were the ones who, helped them complete the marathon. But what I'm starting to see is that K-pop, the music companies, but the music business model and the music system has earned the respect and recognition of these big top US international music labels. And so a lot of these partnerships are really coming from, I think, positions of equality and respect, because the reality is that here in Korea, when we talk about K-pop, each of these very distinguished music companies have a long history of having very well-developed systems. When you look to the US, none of these record labels or management companies have anything close to a system that successfully discovers and develops new music acts. And so when I read about and heard about and saw what these deals look like, they were really, in the truest sense, strategic and joint and really amongst equals. And so again, I'm excited to see, not so much, oh, there's going to be more Korean music acts being discovered in the US. I actually think we might see, some interesting improvements in the US music discovery and development process, but using Korean, processes on doing that. And I think that, nowadays, a lot of the conversations that I have with US music label executives are no longer in any way condescending or patronizing. They're curious, they want to learn, and they want to, find out what that formula is, what that secret sauce is to success, because the numbers are undeniable. And, when you see the success of K-pop over and over and over again on the charts, these massive music companies, they want to study. And the reality is if you look at the revenues of big Korean music companies, they're almost on par with a lot of these major music labels. So if you look at within Universal Music Group, they have multiple labels. If you look at the revenues of each of these labels, there's a good chance that these Korean music companies actually generate more money than an Interscope or a Capitol Music standalone. The last time I did a run through financial investor relations reports, whether it was HYBE, JYP, SM, or YG, they were not only making more money than the top hip hop label in the US, more money than the top country label in the US, and more money than the top Latin label in the US. So the fact that these individual Korean music companies are generating more revenues than the top country, hip hop, and Latin labels, I mean, just speaks volumes.
I want to add something to that as well. I think something that is going to be difficult to overcome, or maybe if it's done properly, it'll be very, very exciting to see, is that we do know is that Korean management companies and labels, they're very, very good at micromanagement. Everybody has bought in, right? Any K-pop idols, trainees, and they signed the dotted line, they bought in, they said, okay, like, my future is yours. Now help me get to the promised land, right? And just inherently, that is just very opposite of an American viewpoint, I would say, as an artist, because Korean culture is very collectivist. In the US culture, it's very individualistic. It's like, even the way that music business is structured out here, it's like, I have my own agent, I have my own manager, and then I have my label, I have my own publisher, and everybody is contracted kind of looking at you as the boss man. But in Korea, because it's, dominantly a 360 model, Bernie, to your point, I'm not surprised by the fact that these numbers are doing better than majors, because they eat a lot more of different buckets and different pies, right? So if they can get that recipe for success and actually translate it to the US market, I mean, it'll explode, but I just think that's very, very tough to do, I would say.
Yeah, wow. That's great. You both are saying such good things. But definitely, I would say, in terms of the model, we do tend to see, like, the narrative in the West is that a star is born, or a star is discovered. But the model in K-pop is that a star is made. Like, you can create a star, sort of. I mean, you need talent. You need basic talent, but that the kind of approach is a bit different. I'm gonna, we're kind of pushing to the last, 10 minutes. So I want to ask, and you guys kind of went so nicely into kind of like the bigger theme that I wanted to enter, which is the next stage, or the new directions of K-pop. But I do want to ask about, we are in the month of May, which is Asian Pacific Heritage Month. So this is sort of nicely aligned. We're officially, as a country, celebrating Asian culture, Asian community, Asian arts, Asian foods, And as you both know, there has been a persistent anti-Asian sentiment. And it's sort of ironic to see the rise of anti-Asian racism overlap with this kind of steadily growing interest in something like Korean pop culture. You know, there was a New York Times article last week that discussed the Korean grocery chain H Mart, formerly known as Hanada Mart, and how it's become this billion-dollar enterprise, and how there's a real popularity in Asian snacks, Asian foods, Asian boba tea, you know, chai, and it's going in tandem with something like K-pop. And the article says that, you know, with visibility comes risk, and I think we're really feeling that as Asians, you know, more pronounced these past few months. And you know, we're seeing all sorts of turbulence. So you know, on this broader topic of race and diversity, I'm going to ask you sort of a clunky question, and one is, so it's two parts. One is the work of managing Asian and Asian American artists today. What are the challenges? Are there challenges in managing Asian or Asian American artists today in the mainstream? Okay, so in general or in comparison to the previous era. So that's part one. Part two is you yourselves as Asian Americans. How has it been for you as an Asian American working in the arts, in the music business management field? You know, a field that was, you know, it's not traditionally been populated by Asian American managers. So the first part, managing Asian American artists, and second part, you working yourself as an Asian American.
How much time do you have?
About
30 minutes.
Wait.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I can do a.
Give us the nutshell version.
Yeah, I'll give you the abridged version. So, obviously, I manage a predominantly, you know, dominant roster of Asian American artists right now, and you know, one of the biggest challenges, as I alluded to, with like being categorized as K-pop, is when K-pop wasn't dope, right? It's still knocking down a lot of barriers, but it's still not like in a place where Western media will look at like a Post Malone, because there are limitations, right? Like even in hip hop and stuff, like there are limitations just because culturally, and you know, just the laws in Korea that you couldn't do what maybe a US hip hop artist does out here and then be glorified for it. So I think like there have been a lot of challenges because it's hard to differentiate, and I said that earlier, but it's like when I was really going to market with Eric early on, he had a couple ballads to his name, but it always felt like I always had to take a backseat and over pitch because people wouldn't give it a shot, right? It was very like, yeah, you know, K-pop, it's like bubblegum candy, you know, pop shit. I'm not interested. And so we had to always collaborate with artists that were maybe under major labels, but were significantly smaller than Eric, you know, with Epic High and that, because it's like the power distance just by being in K-pop, it felt like you're always beneath. Now you see that it's kind of closing the gap, but you know, it was just very hard to do a tasteful collaboration. And so it really, really runs deep, and it's becoming easier. And I think I told this to you in our initial call, but when I first started in the music industry, I had a Q&A with a music executive, and I asked him, like, this is back in 2014. I said, with the exception of the Far East movement and Psy, which a lot of people look at as like a comedy act for Gangnam Style, viral video, why have there been no Asian artists in the mainstream media? And without hesitation, he said, don't take this the wrong way. Asians just aren't cool, you know? And that's like, that's 7 years ago, but I didn't really take it like to heart. I look around at the media and I'm just like, the way that we're being portrayed, I get it, you know? It wasn't too long ago that people couldn't get over the fact that G-Dragon was wearing makeup and dancing and having all this choreo behind him. People just, it was just so foreign to them. And so I think like little by little we're breaking down these stereotypes, but it's still not enough. And so with that said, I kind of answered part two, but we still have a lot of work to do. I think BTS and Blackpink, they're scratching the surface, but that's why it's important that the AOMGs of the world and hip hop artists, indie artists, everybody, not just K-pop. I think like Asian American artists just need to keep doing what they do best. It just takes time. It's like this weird cycle that needs to happen because we've been so invisible for so long.
Great. Bernie, can you
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean, Eddie, said it extremely eloquently. And, again, I got to give a shout out to his brother Eric when he wrote that, amazing op-ed for Time Magazine. I think, given the times and the tragedy and what was needed, a voice, Eric really stepped up. And, I was extremely not only moved, but extremely proud that there was a Korean American and Asian American artist who was willing to put their voice and their out there, because traditionally a lot of Korean American, Asian Americans, for whatever reasons, often, were silent, and or quiet, or wanted to avoid the heat. But I am very grateful that, unfortunately, through a lot of tragedy, Asian Americans have really stood up and are making their voices heard and making their opinions heard. But, like Eddie, I've had some pretty fucked up, stupid, patronizing, condescending meetings with music industry people who are always looking for an excuse to be dismissive about not just K-pop or Korean music, but just any music out of Asia, because it doesn't fit their very narrow narrative of what's cool. I find it extremely ironic that you have a lot of, I'll just say it, white executives who are, they look to Black music as very cool. But then for me, I'm a big hip hop fan, and some of my most favorite hip hop acts find a lot of their inspiration from Asia, like the Wu-Tang Clan and whatnot.
Wu-Tang.
And so, this idea of cross-cultural influencing and whatnot, I find to be a very vibrant part of the evolution of music just as a whole. And, I know for me, the truth is that I decided to make a career in Korea because in the early mid 90s to the early 2000s, I was too aware that to succeed in the US entertainment media, and particularly music industry, as an Asian American, was going to be extremely difficult. And so besides myself, many people like myself, not just in Korea, but we see similar things happening in Taiwan and whatnot, is many came out to Asia to find success and find validation in Asia. And then as artists and executives and companies started to get bigger and bigger, many of them wanted to roll back, to the US. And so, I had a conversation with the US music label who were asking, like, where do we find the next big Korean and Asian music act? And I told them, stop looking across the Pacific. These artists are actually in your backyard. Most of these top Asian acts, many of them have lived or studied either in Los Angeles, Irvine, Vancouver, Toronto, New York. So, and the whole idea bothered me because Asian American to them was still foreign. It wasn't even considered American. And one of my biggest frustrations with sometimes with with especially with the Black Lives Matter movement is there is a higher awareness of diversity, inclusivity, and representation. But often Asian voices in the music industry aren't heard because there's so few already on the inside. They can't even be heard because their voices can't be heard. And so, I would love to see sooner rather than later the ability to walk into meetings with US or European music companies, whether they be talent agencies or record labels, where there's at least somebody in the room that is Asian. Almost 11 out of 10 meetings I take in Los Angeles, there are 0 Asians in the room. And I feel like Beyonce walking into a Reebok pitch meeting, and she walked out of that meeting because there was nobody of African American descent in the pitch room, and she walked out. And when I read that story, I was like, oh shit, next time should I walk out too? But the point being is that I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for the fact that there are programs like this here at Berkeley and other music colleges and schools that are training and teaching the next wave and next generation of music executives who don't necessarily have to be Asian, but just at least Asian music market aware. And so for that, that's why, when an opportunity like this pops up, I just hope that, the next wave of executives and artists and managers don't have to go through myself and, Eddie had to go through.
Thank you so much. I apologize. We are 2 minutes over. we are at -2 minutes. But thank you so much for sharing, both of you, for sharing those things. I'm sure you all are, following the story about the Hollywood Foreign Press and the Golden Globes, where, there was, backlash because there was not one Black person in the voting committee. So we're seeing a bit of things, if not changing, at least there's more awareness. I want to hope, but because we are at -3 minutes, we're gonna have to end it here right there tonight. They say all good things come to an end. We hope that you enjoyed the panel. We're so sorry that we're over. I just want to thank you so much, Bernie Cho, Eddie Nam, for joining us tonight and for sharing your insight and expertise on the K-pop phenomenon. Everyone, be sure to check out the interesting projects that Eddie Nam is working on at Dive Studios, including Mindset, and also check out the documentary series K-pop Evolution on YouTube. It's a YouTube original. That's one of Bernie Cho's recent projects on which he was both, as Kelly mentioned, commentator and consultant. If you're able, please join us for the second session in just a quick 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 26 minutes at this point, at 8:30 p.m. Boston time, when Jae Chung of the Korean group Solid will be coming in for a masterclass in K-pop music production. You can check out tomorrow's panels as well, and on our event page, kpopsummit.net. Special thanks to Mr. Ray Saul, Assistant Director of Global Initiatives, and to Morgan Lucy, Coordinator of the Professional Music Department, for facilitating our Zoom house this evening. Thanks to you all for chiming in or zooming in from all over the world in a year of many Zooms. As we wrap up, we're going to put on a slide with the K-pop sampler list provided by both of our guests tonight, and I'll drop those in the chats in the chat box as well. We're going to close out with another song. So please log off as you need to. The song is about 4 or 5 minutes, but stay as you're able. Again, thank you, Mr. Eddie Nam, Mr. Bernie Cho. I invite everyone to express your thanks to them directly in the chat box. And here is You Again by Galaxy Express. Have a good evening, everybody. It was so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.